about this situation? Over to you, Mychailo.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chris, for that introduction. I will not be as emotional as I was in my clip. I apologize for doing that. I've done many interviews in the last week, and I actually did quite a few interviews before that as well, and I've actually never had that kind of an emotional reaction to the question of why does this matter. So I'm not going to get emotional this time. I'm going to try to be like a university professor is supposed to be. I guess more of an explainer than anything else. For those of you that are maybe surprised by my accent, I was born in Canada. I spent 27 years of my life in Canada. I was born in a place called Kitchener, Ontario, which is about 70 or 80 miles west of Toronto. I've actually never been to Montana. I'm sorry for that. I've been to many other places in the U.S. because out of the 27 years that I spent in Canada, I traveled a lot to the States, an awful lot to the States on business. I then moved to England for 4 years, and I studied in a place called the University of Cambridge, where I did my PhD. And for the last 20 years, I've been living in Ukraine. We've got 4 kids with my wife, and we live our normal place of I guess normal house or normal place of living is pretty well in the center of Kyiv. Not exactly in the center. It's about 2 subway stops from what we call Independence Square, in the Podil region of Kyiv, which is the lower part of the city. 12 years ago, we built a cottage or a house about 70 miles south of Kyiv. I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm not going to tell you the exact location for security reasons, but at the moment we're safe. One of the things that I found really strange was when we built the house, most people looked at me and said, "Why would you need a basement?" I wasn't particularly interested in having a basement either, but being from Canada originally, how do you build a house without a basement? It's sort of a normal thing. So we did build a basement, and strangely enough, the basement has now become effectively a bomb shelter, because we do get air raid sirens, or air raid warnings rather, pretty regularly during the last week. For those of you that might be interested in reading up a little bit more, I'll do a little bit of a plug if you don't mind. I wrote a book after my last experience of revolution in Ukraine, and we lived through a revolution in 2013-14, which was primarily peaceful. It didn't end particularly peacefully, but we had about 100 deaths at the end of it. But that's not even close to compared to what we have today. And the book is called Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War, a chronicle and analysis of the Revolution of Dignity. So if anybody's interested in that, you might want to look at that. So what's happened and what have we been doing? Look, I'm somebody who does a lot of political analysis. I'm a professor of sociology. I also teach in business school, and I've been following Ukrainian politics and Russian politics for a very long time. Like I said, I wrote a book on it. So I can't say that this invasion was unexpected. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I posted on my Facebook page yesterday was a link to an article that a colleague and I wrote in 2015, and I was planning on kind of updating that text, and I realized that there's absolutely no need to update it because everything that we were predicting 7 years ago has happened almost exactly. We're in a scenario where this was not unexpected, which means that our family had a lot of dried goods and a lot of canned goods and a lot of things that we had, needed just in case. We had it prepared. So we brought that with us. Obviously, we've left a lot of things in Kyiv, and we certainly hope that we'll be returning to Kyiv shortly. Although of the way things are going, I don't think it's actually going to be shortly. It'll probably end up being a little bit longer. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So we are, So we're kind of holed up here. There's another 3 families here with us. So it's getting tight. This was a cottage that was built for 6 people. We now have 14 in it. So it's getting a little bit tight, but the more the merrier, as they say, and people that want to get into safety will certainly be happy to have them. One of the things that I'm really impressed with, and I think that many of you have probably read about this and heard about it, and as far as I can see, the TVs have been, I've been invited to speak on Fox and various other networks, NBC today. I guess the news of Ukraine's resistance is getting through to the US. And that's really, I think, one of the things that's important. Nobody was expecting a little country of 44 million people, the size of Texas, to be able to withstand the largest country in the world and the second largest army in the world. And no, we're not winning. We're not winning yet. But we're definitely holding our own. And I think that that's the important thing. Putin was expecting to be able to take the capital in 2 days, 3 days. We now have documents that have been captured from Russian soldiers that are showing that he was planning on having the country liberated by March 8th. Well, it's March the 4th now, and he's not even close. So we're doing well. Now, it's a war. And I know most of you are probably too young for this, but I grew up when I was your age on a series called MASH. And I remember there was this one scene in MASH where Hawkeye is standing there crying after he loses a patient, and Henry Blake, who's the commanding officer, comes out to console him, and he says, you know, there was one thing that they taught me in command school, and that is that in war, young men die. And there's not much that doctors can do about rule number one. Well, people are dying. A lot of people are dying. We don't know how many. The numbers aren't being made public. We know that, I mean, obviously there's propaganda on all sides. The Russian invaders' numbers are being made public. Civilian casualties and Ukrainian casualties are not being made public. But I can tell you that in any war, you take the invaders' casualties and you multiply them basically by 2, and you get the defenders plus the civilian casualties. So at this point, we're looking at about 20,000 dead in the last week, 10,000 on the Russian side, and about 1,000, maybe 1,500 Ukrainian soldiers, and the rest being civilian. The Russians have started to bomb civilian targets. As some of you might know, overnight, we were very concerned because the largest atomic power plant in Europe, which consists of 5 reactors, was hit with Russian rockets. And they actually specifically targeted one of the reactors. Thankfully, it didn't penetrate. We've got no radiation at the moment, but that is potentially a disaster, not just of Ukrainian, but of global proportions. Because if that reactor actually does get breached, Chernobyl is going to look like, Chernobyl or Fukushima are going to look like little accidents, little problems. So we're holding our own. We're holding our own as best as we can. And the goal at this point is to defend. The goal at this point is to get the Russians out of our country. We're not interested in gaining territory. One of the things that is very, very clear on the Ukrainian side is we're not going to cross an inch of Russian territory if there's an opportunity to do that. We're defending ourselves. And that makes life difficult, but it also makes us, if you like, righteous, which is something that's very important for keeping morale up. Mobilization is total. We went to the local store here yesterday. There's not much in the store, unfortunately, but we're in a place where people have cows and people have chickens and people have pigs. So we're kind of not particularly worried about how we're going to eat. And we have a well here, which means that we're okay for water. But the local school has been turned into a workshop for making camouflage netting. So that you understand what camouflage netting is, it's basically a net where you hang various pieces of cloth, and that from the air looks like it's either bush or trees or something like that, and therefore it's camouflaging anything that's underneath it. People are basically just donating old clothes, donating all kinds of stuff. And what I saw is the local gymnasium had about 60 or 70 kids and young people doing what they do. The local the local area around me has checkpoints set up, and we've got patrols. We have a nightly curfew. So right now it's 5:45. By 8 o'clock, all lights are off, and no one is outside. No one is outside for simple reasons. We have had reports of paratrooper drops in the region, and the closest explosions have been about 30 miles, 35 miles away from us. So we don't particularly want people outside. We do get air raid warnings periodically, and those usually come over the phone. There's a special network set up for that. So what we've done is we're huddled in our basements when that happens, and then we come out. I'm doing a lot of writing. The one thing that I'm asking everybody that I talk to, every single person that I talk to, we Ukrainians will be able to handle the ground war. We're doing okay. As a matter of fact, we're doing better than okay. What we need is air support. We need a closed sky. We need a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Now, Western leaders, including President Biden, are reluctant to do that. And the reason that they are reluctant to do that is because they're afraid that an American or a British or French or a German or whatever NATO plane will get into a direct conflict with a Russian plane, and that will lead to World War III. And my answer to that one is that means that Western leaders have become scared of terrorist number one in the world, because terrorist number one in the world is holding the West hostage. He's basically saying, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to throw a bomb at you. And that's wrong, because as far as I remember, America doesn't negotiate with terrorists, and America doesn't get held hostage to terrorists. That was what I remember growing up on when 9/11 happened. And that's what I thought that we could count on. Right now, we can't. The biggest problem is we're being hit with rockets, and we're being hit by Russian planes. If we had close air support, if we had a proper anti-aircraft system like the Patriot missile system or the Israeli Iron Dome or something like that, we'd be able to get the Russian ground troops off of our soil within a couple of weeks. I think that's about all I want to say at this point. That was 15 minutes, which was longer than I expected. I apologize for that. I expect that you guys have got a lot of questions. So as someone who's got a teaching career behind him, I'll try to answer them as best I can.
Mychailo, thank you so much for that insight, and to everybody out there in Montana. Again, those of you who have joined since we began, Mychailo is talking to us just south of the Ukraine capital, Kyiv, giving us some insight on what is really happening there on the ground. So I would like to ask our participants, be sure that you have your microphones muted. But if anybody has some questions, and I know you do, I mean, this is your chance to ask the real questions to somebody who is right there inside Ukraine. Please don't be shy. This is the moment. So you can chat in your questions. Since we have it's a remarkable turnout, Mychailo. I also was not expecting so many people. I'm so happy to see that. If you can chat in, or if you'd like to do the little raised hand icon on Zoom, and then you can unmute and we'll come in and you can ask your question directly to Mychailo. I see something has come in the chat. Mychailo, question: how do you cope with the stress of your situation?
I saw that question, and that's probably the most common question that I get whenever I get interviewed by reporters. How do I deal with the stress? How are my kids dealing with it? How are we holding up as a family? What have we seen? Have we actually seen any tanks, explosions, etc.? I don't know how to answer that. It's quite frankly, I apologize. The person that asked is someone that's called Narrington. I apologize if I'm going to be a little bit rough on you, but I don't know how to answer that question, because it's actually a little bit annoying. Because how do you relay in words that a family that I've been raising for 18 years, my oldest is 18, our youngest is 12. We're under, we're we're under a bomb threat. I mean, we got missiles firing on us. You deal with it by talking a lot. I deal with it by writing. I try to do 2 or 3 Facebook posts a day, calling on the West to help us out. I talk to people. We talk to each other. But realistically, for the last week, we've been geared to our phones and to our computers, trying to get as much information as we can. I don't know what else to tell you. Communications network being cut off. Yeah, there is that fear. I will tell you that as far as communications networks are concerned, we are very lucky to have continued communications. I don't know when it will be cut off, but it will eventually be cut off. As long as this spot that we're on remains under Ukrainian control, we will have communications. The areas that are under Russian control, and there are some areas under Russian control, the communications have been cut off. The organization that I work for right now, our chief accountant, is under Russian occupation. She called me yesterday. I could barely hear her. She's it was a very emotional conversation, because she basically said, look, everybody in our village is just sick and tired. There's about 100 armored personnel carriers from the Russian side that are standing in our village. There's soldiers that have started looting. They raped a woman recently. As she put it, send in the missiles, cover us up. This has got to stop. Missiles have not been sent in, thankfully. Vida's holding up. That's the best I could say. So let me go back to some questions here.
Can I just, yeah, let me just draw you to, there's a very interesting question here regarding the EU. And if I could just expand that a little bit. We are all, of course, watching the news. We see Russia, Ukraine, but also mention of NATO, EU, and others. So the question here is, how would being part of the EU help Ukraine? Can you add also any comments on being part of NATO to that question?
Well, part of NATO is obvious. I don't think that at this point yet, Putin would have attacked Ukraine if Ukraine were part of NATO. Now that it's escalating, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I am expecting, so that you understand, I am expecting a war against NATO within the short term. In other words, Putin will be trying to test NATO's resolve. We are expecting it either in the Baltic states, in other words, Lithuania, Estonia, or Latvia, or something in Romania or Bulgaria in the Black Sea. But we are definitely expecting an escalation, because Putin can't afford to lose. And right now he is losing. The way that you get out of the situation if you're losing is to escalate. But looking back a week and a half ago, if Ukraine had been part of NATO, we probably would not have been attacked. Simple as that. But this is where the catch-22 happens. We were not let into NATO because apparently Germany, France, certain other countries were afraid of provoking Putin. In other words, they were afraid of provoking Putin by letting Ukraine into NATO. And now that Ukraine is not into NATO, what have they done? They've provoked Putin. So it's kind of a, this is where I guess it's a little bit of crying over spilled milk. But yes, definitely NATO membership would have been very helpful. And I think it probably may be helpful in the future if there's a NATO to join. I'm actually quite skeptical that there will be a NATO to join after Putin tests the resolve. We shall see. As far as the EU is concerned, the EU is not a defensive alliance. As you may know, EU membership has actually now been offered to Ukraine, finally. The reason that it wasn't offered originally was because Ukraine was not meeting the economic criteria, which is understandable, I suppose. Now the economic criteria have been a little bit relaxed, and the EU has realized that maybe Ukraine has something to add to the European Union. So I think that membership will be forthcoming in the future. But you know what? I will be very frank with you. I think that once this war is over, the traditional blocks that we have, be it NATO, be it EU, be it the institutions, the international institutions that we're used to, including the UN, by the way, will change. In other words, you are probably living through a time when all of the things that you've learned in school, in international relations, in history, recent history, and that sort of thing, all of these institutions that were formed after the Second World War and have existed for the last 80 years, or have been developing in the last 80 years, like the European Union, I don't see them surviving, not after this war is done. So I think that we will have changes in those institutions, including the European Union and including NATO as well. And I think we're going to come up with different alliances, different economic unions, different ways of building cooperation between countries.
Mychailo, I'm curating the questions here, and there are so many really good ones, but I'm going to choose some that particularly pique my interest. Here's an interesting one. Hold on, where did it go? Yeah, sir, please speak to the historical similarities to the Nazi expansion in Europe and the West's apathy today.
Huh. Although I used to be good at history when I was in high school, and I actually did I did an honors BA way back when, and it was a joint honors, and one of my joint honors was in history. But Second World War was not really something that I was really strong in. So I'm not sure that I can make that many comparisons. Obviously, the comparison of Putin to Hitler is pretty obvious, so I don't think we need to go very, very far there. History in this part of the world is very problematic. Because Ukraine is, if you're interested in history, there's a wonderful book by Timothy Snyder called The Bloodlands, which is about Ukraine, effectively. He says it's about Belarus, Ukraine, and parts of Poland, but it's basically about Ukraine. Ukraine was the spot where most of the deaths that happened in the Second World War and before the Second World War under Stalin's policies happened. So according to Snyder, we're looking at about 20 to 25 million people dying in a span of 15 years. That's pretty amazing if you look at it. 25 million people. I'm not sure what the population of Montana is, but I think it's less than that. Just imagine, sort of, if you like, about 10% of a little less than 10% of the US population being killed off in 15 years. It's pretty scary. Not sure how much more I can give you in terms of historical parallels and information on history.
Okay, Mychailo, here's another one coming from Helena. It's the question on everybody's mind. If NATO joins the fight in the air or on the ground, are you confident we can beat the Russians and win the war decisively, or would this turn into a long conflict? Simply put, does Russia stand a chance if NATO joins the fight?
You know what? I don't think Russia stands a chance even if NATO doesn't join the fight. It's just that if NATO joins the fight, it's going to be a lot quicker. At the end of the day, I'm convinced that we can beat Russia. Yeah, it'll be a lot quicker if it happens with NATO help, a lot quicker. But at the end of the day, this war is probably going to end, believe it or not in Ukraine. This war only has one end, and that's the removal of Putin from power. That can happen either through his death, or it can happen through his running away from protesters, whatever, and getting probably the only place that he would be able to find shelter is China at this point. Or North Korea, maybe. The point is that I don't think that it ends in any other way. Now the question is how long and how many people die. How long does it last and how many people die? But your question about does NATO involvement end the war decisively? Absolutely. One of the things that we have seen, and we have been completely, this is something that's very obvious. Russia's army is a paper tiger. The equipment is old. The soldiers were given rations, so that you understand, for 3 days. One of the biggest problems we have right now in those areas of Ukraine that have come under Russian occupation, in other words, those that are closer to the border, is looting. And the reason it's looting is because the Russian soldiers have nothing to eat. You don't win a war if you can't even feed your own army. The biggest, we have at this point on the Ukrainian side, more captured equipment than we had equipment at the start of the war. Okay, so we have more vehicles and tanks now that we've captured than we had at the start. And the reason for it is they run out of gas. And when they run out of gas, the soldiers run away. In other words, it's a ragtag army, which has got all kinds of excess equipment. But at the end of the day, NATO's involvement would end the war within 2 days.
Mychailo, interesting one here. In the age of technology and social media, has that affected the war at all? Your views on technology and social media?
Absolutely. One of the reasons we're talking to you today, and I mean, look, we are in day 8 of a huge conflict, and here I am sitting in my house to the south of Kyiv, and I'm talking to, well, from what I can see on Zoom, probably a couple hundred students in Montana, a place that I've never been to, and it's on the other side of the world. So, obviously, technology is massively affecting this, and I'm absolutely positive that the fact that Ukraine has had so much global support is because of the fact that we've got social media and we've got technology. We're very grateful for that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the United States is providing so far, if I'm not mistaken, about $1 billion in aid. In addition to that, we've got economic aid coming through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which is also effectively US money. Not all of it, but most of it. We've got European Union aid. We've got all kinds of humanitarian stuff happening. We've got diplomatic stuff. The world is mobilizing behind Ukraine. Zelensky's become a rock star. I mean, at the end of the day, that's about social media. That's about technology. By the way, just so that you know, a week and a half ago, Zelensky was not a particularly popular president. His approval rating was sitting around 25, 26%. It's now over 98%. I mean, at the end of the day, he kind of grew into the job. But one of the reasons that happened, and one of the reasons that we've got such a consolidation of the global international community and Ukrainians, is because of social media and the fact that we can talk to each other on a regular basis because of technology. Yeah, good point.
Mychailo, there's a few questions about your home life right now, and I'll just remind you that it's about this time there'll be some comings and goings from students. But let me put some of these together. There's a question about the kids who are staying with you. Of course, you're talking to high school students, and they're wondering what is their situation in their daily life. And then the other is, other than what you've already mentioned, what kind of precautions do you need to take in your daily life to stay safe?
Well, okay. Our kids at the moment, obviously school's not operating. That the 25th, as soon as we had the state of emergency called, all the schools were closed. So school is not operating, not even in a video conferencing thing. Nothing's, all schools are closed. So my kids are spending time. My oldest, or my older two, are spending time on social media. With their friends. They've got friends and acquaintances in other countries. By the way, if anybody's interested in setting up chats or anything like that, what you can do is you can find me on Facebook, and I would be happy to I'd be happy to take some messages from you and put you in touch with my kids, or you can find them on you can use just do a search for our surname. There's not that many Wynnyckys out there, so the older ones are on Facebook. They're spending time doing what they can, getting information out, gathering information. My younger ones are having a little bit more stress. They're not necessarily the 12 and the 14-year-old, or I mean, they understand what's going on, obviously, but this is being pretty stressful for them. How do we keep ourselves safe? Well, I think that the fact that we've moved here was the major thing. I mean, we are in a safe spot. Like I said before, when I was starting, the closest explosions to us have been 35 miles away. That's actually quite a bit if you think about it. So we're in a safe spot, and that's how we're coping.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to welcome any new students and new classrooms into the chat here. We've been going for about 30 minutes with a lot of great exchange with Mychailo. I'll just remind people to chat in questions if you have them. As Mychailo has been making mention of books and situations, I've chatted in various links. Most recently is his Facebook profile, so he's very generously offered to connect with other students, so you can talk to people your age directly and ask them what's going on. I would really encourage you to do that. Mychailo, there's a number of questions about the morale, the sentiment of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian army, of the Russian soldiers. What can you tell us about that?
The sentiments of the morale of the Ukrainian army. Well, look, I don't have direct contact with people that are serving, except through, again, social media. What I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, a couple of phone calls that we've received, is the morale is exceptionally high. I'm not going to say that that is 100% universal. I mean, obviously, when your buddies, I've had a couple of friends who've lost their buddies. That always hurts when you lose buddies in war. You know, I think you've all seen war movies. You know what I'm talking about. So yeah, that hurts, but it creates a scenario where they want to be even more vengeful. War is tough. War is not something that, you know, I just mentioned war movies. War movies sometimes glamorize war, and war is dirty. It's ugly. People die. People have their legs ripped off. People have their arms ripped off. People have their faces smashed. It's not pretty. But when you're in a defensive war, it gives you a feeling of righteousness. And I think that that's probably one of the major things that is keeping up morale. You know, if this war were happening on somebody else's territory, then maybe morale would be a problem. It's happening on our territory. And more than that, the population is 110% behind it. I saw a question there in the chat. I was just, as I put on my glasses, about, as a male, am I required to serve? I'm not required to serve because I'm 51. Those that are, in other words, mobilization is up to 50 years old. But will I serve? In other words, am I prepared to defend my home, my family? Yes, of course I am. And unfortunately, I don't have a hell of a lot of training. I've fired some rifles in my life. I used to be a pilot a long time ago, but I don't think anybody's going to let me fly a MiG, although I'd really like to. But yeah, at the end of the day, if it comes to it, of course I will. This is home, and like anybody else, I will defend my home and I will defend my family. And I think that that's just the way we feel around here. And that's why, that's really one of the reasons that I think that this war cannot end in any other way than a Ukrainian victory, because the people that I know here are just, they're not going to live under occupation. Simple as that. And even if the occupation does come, you know, in other words, even if the Russians do overrun us, at the end of the day, they can't govern us. There's no possible way that they can govern us, because nobody's going to be listening to their orders. Nobody's going to be following their instructions. People are going to be in an insurgency and using Molotov cocktails, which I'm sure that you've seen the videos of, or if you haven't, then maybe Google it. You know, cars driving by a Russian truck, and basically a girl turning up, throwing a Molotov cocktail into the driver's seat, and obviously the Russian truck blowing up. You know, that kind of thing is going to be commonplace. There's no way that this country can be actually occupied.
Mychailo, I'll jump in and encourage people to chat in questions. Use the everyone rather than to me. I am getting some on my own. Mychailo, a common question that we have here, and I'll expand it a bit. High school students want to know what they can do. I'd also like to hear you say what we in our communities, not necessarily our nation and our political leaders and NATO, but what can you advise us to do that is helpful in this situation?
Well, look, there is a humanitarian disaster unfolding. We got a lot of refugees. We've got a lot of people that are going to be wounded, psychologically as well as physically, and we're going to need some help. That is actually forthcoming. I think that there's been a lot of, and we're very grateful for that, by the way. I don't thank enough, and I should. We're very grateful for the aid that's coming. And there's a lot of it. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I heard recently from my friends in Canada was the embassies are actually saying, don't send aid, please send money. And the reason being that aid transport planes cost money to get stuff here. In actual fact, we can buy stuff that is most needed, and we can be much more flexible on the ground here. So, I mean, what can I say? Donate to the Red Cross. Go to various Ukrainian diaspora organizations, various Ukrainian community organizations. We've set up all kinds of sites in the U.S. Ukrainian Congress Committee, Congressional Committee, I think it's called, of America, UCCA. There's a Canadian version called the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. There's a relief fund in Chicago, I know. There's lots of opportunities like that. But at the end of the day, that's the humanitarian side. Wars don't get won with blankets. Wars don't get won with donations. Wars get won with weapons. And I realize that this is really scary. I understand that it's scary. It's scary because involving US troops, nobody's asking for US troops on the ground, by the way, but involving US troops in the air is risky. It means putting your own soldiers in harm's way. And but I remember the reaction. I remember the Afghan war. I remember Desert Storm. I remember the second Iraq war. I remember stuff that happened in Afghanistan. The United States has always been pretty forward and pretty helpful when it came to defending freedom and defending what's right. This time, the United States is afraid. It's afraid of nuclear weapons. And that's called being hostage to a terrorist. So I think that I would like to believe that your politicians will respond to political pressure. So what can a high school student do? Organize, write letters, call your congressman, call your senator, call the White House. Say that you support a no-fly zone over Ukraine. If there's enough political pressure, people will realize that, the leaders will realize that, yeah, it's the right thing to do.
Mychailo, a number of questions regarding you made mention to refugees. We know from our news sources over 1 million Ukrainians have left the country to the surrounding countries, most, if more than half of those into Poland. Can you make any comment on how difficult it is to get out of Ukraine right now? And then there's a follow-up here. What conditions would make you and your family leave Ukraine?
Okay, I'll start with the second question. None. I'm not leaving. And we're not leaving. That's been discussed in the family. You were asking how we cope. It's been discussed over and over again. We're not leaving. But having said that, in addition to the 1 million that have left the country, there's probably an additional, I would say, million to maybe even more than that have been displaced from Eastern Ukraine into Western Ukraine. So getting out of the country is one problem across the Polish border. And there's lineups there right now that are sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days long. In other words, it takes a very long time to get across the border. But the west of the country is a lot safer than where I am, for example, in the center, and certainly an awful lot safer than places like Kharkiv and Mariupol, which are under constant bombardment, and Kherson, which has recently been effectively occupied. So people are leaving from the east and they're traveling to the west. Much of the humanitarian assistance that we need is actually not in Poland. We need it in Western Ukraine. We need it in those places where people are what's called internally displaced, as opposed to becoming refugees as soon as they cross a border. Yeah, what the follow-up question was, what happens, what would have to happen for us to leave? We're not leaving. My wife is originally from Lviv in Western Ukraine. We have some property there as well. So if push comes to shove, really bad, then we will probably end up leaving for Lviv. But we will definitely not be exiting Ukraine.
We have time for just a couple more questions, Mychailo. This last one's very interesting. What are the international implications for the West if we fail to support Ukrainian self-determination or fail to come to the aid of the Ukraine?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. It's a very good one. First of all, the reason I don't know how to answer it is because I'm not I'm not contemplating failure. It's a scenario of even if the Russians overrun us, we will still never live under Russia. So we can't fail. At the end of the day, the country's mobilized and it will resist. And there's this I don't remember what the film is called. It's come from my movies, goes way back to when I was a high school kid. And it's the idea is that the United States has been taken over, or part of the United States has been taken over by the Soviet Union. And there's these Wolverines, they call themselves. It's kind of a bunch of young people that are thank you, Red Dawn. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. And so I see that kind of a scenario happening with resistance in the mountains, in the forests, that sort of thing. But I don't see it failing. So, or being occupied. In terms of the international effects, though, sorry, I'm going to try not to get emotional at this point. I'm going to get angry. When the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, proved through the night that our flag was still there. Some people in the world believe that the United States stands for certain values. You got 40 million people here that are waiting for you to put your money where your mouth is. Simple as that. It's all about not just prestige, I think, it's about leadership. And if you don't respond, if you do nothing, America's place as a global leader, as someone who is, if you like, a beacon of freedom and beacon of democracy, will be no more. If you can't even support a ragtag bunch of insurgents in Eastern Europe, then, this isn't Iraq, this isn't Afghanistan, this isn't a place where people are, of a different religion than where they're different. I don't know, wherever they're different. We're sorry for, I apologize if I'm sounding racist. It doesn't mean to be racist, but at the end of the day, the United States heritage is European heritage for the most part. So a European country is under attack. Why aren't you here?
Well, Mychailo, let me ask this. I'm going to be our last question. It's just going to segue perfectly. Just your thoughts on this. There's several questions regarding the potential results of escalation. You mentioned it yourself. It's what people worry about. It's what politicians worry about, that the deeper you get in, the more you escalate and the higher the risk of an expanded and more serious confrontation, leading to this question that we received about, your thoughts or general thoughts on, the use of nuclear weapons, in fact, has oddly been raised, or not oddly, last week. What escalation? Should we be worried? What are your views? Mychailo, your audio came off.
Sorry. I turned it off so you wouldn't get any echo, and now you should be hearing me. I actually did a post on this today, and I did a couple posts, but this one was what I was talking about is actually quoting a fellow by the name of Machiavelli. Some of you might remember Machiavelli from learning things in school. Machiavelli had a quote and says, "There is no avoiding war. It can only be postponed. And when it's postponed, it's to the advantage of your enemy." Maybe you don't realize this yet, but Russia is at war with the United States. He said so. He's very open about it. He sees Ukraine as a country that should cease to exist, and he views Ukraine as being a puppet of the United States. He's made it exceptionally clear that he already believes himself to be at war with the US. So my statement on it is, yeah, there's a risk of thermonuclear war. There is. The United States, we happen to know, is extremely well protected, much better protected than we are. You've got what's called massive air support or air coverage. You've got what we're asking for, the Iron Dome concept. There's no nuclear missiles that will actually fall on you. What we're afraid of at this point is that a nuclear missile might be launched at us. Not a missile, what's called a tactical nuclear weapon. Not a missile, because ICBMs are very difficult to reposition, and they're all targeted at you. And I mean, the United States government knows exactly where every single Russian missile is, and it's not even going to get off the ground before anything actually happens. I mean, believe me, you've had 30 years to figure it out, and there hasn't been any new missiles yet. So you're safe. The question is, but look, having said that, there is always a risk. There is always a risk. Let's just say I'll probably answer the question this way. Do I believe that Putin is considering the nuclear option? Not only do I believe that Putin is considering the nuclear option, I'm convinced that he will use the nuclear option sooner or later. In other words, that's the reality that we live in. Simple.
Thanks, Mychailo. I'm going to have to wrap up now, but I'll do a short wrap up, and I'm going to give the last word to you. But let me just wrap up by first thanking all of the students and teachers who have come on this morning here in Montana. It shows you're interested, that you're engaged. You asked the question, what can we do? Mychailo answered, be engaged, learn, go to our political leaders, our senators, our representatives, write them letters, understand what's going on, be active. This does affect you. It does affect us. As Mychailo explained, it's not something happening somehow in a bubble a million miles away. This is happening in our world right now, and we are feeling the impact, less so than Mychailo and his family and his fellow country people, but it is there. So I want to encourage you to stay engaged on this. And Mychailo, thank you for helping us understand this. I also want to quickly thank our very generous sponsors at the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance and Stockman Bank. They help us bring this to you, and many other programs. Teachers, if you want more of this, let us know. This is what we do. And so we're happy to engage with you and your students on world issues, on the Ukraine, you name it. Thanks a lot for making this happen. So that's the wrap up for me. I'd like to give the last word to Mychailo. Over to you.
Sure. I'm actually, I'm looking at some of the images on my screen right now, and I've got an image that says Samantha Thomas, and I've got a young lady in red that's dancing in the picture. And, I will say that I really want to be in a situation where my kids will be dancing. And at this point, it'll happen. It'll happen. It'll definitely happen. It'll happen hopefully sooner rather than later, but we will dance. And you guys can make it happen a lot sooner. Please pressure your government to help. At the same time, realize that the world that you're going to wake up in a couple of weeks, maybe in a couple of months, is going to be very different from the world that you live in today. We live in a society right now, in a world that is basically at war. Ukraine is not a little country far away that's not affecting you. It's affecting you very directly because, like it or not, we're the frontier of Europe. Now, once this is over, I will tell you that I'd like to invite every single one of you to visit us because it's an absolutely fantastic country. I fell in love with it when I first saw it 30 years ago, and I've been living here for 20 years. And I can't say that I am regretting even a minute of that, even living through a war. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And I invite you to visit once this is all over. Thanks for having me today.
Mychailo, we thank you for your time, for your bravery, for your courage, for sharing with us what is happening with you, your family, and your country. We return the invitation, an open invitation, anytime to visit us here in Montana. We wish you peace. We wish you safety. And we hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you, Montana.
Hey, sorry,
Thank you,
Chris,
Mychailo.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you again for having me. I got to go because we just had an air raid warning.
Okay. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.